Number 2, big issues require big resources to transform. This is real easy to fall into this kind of thought pattern. If people have had long-standing issues, or maybe something that isn't necessarily long-standing, but it's a large issue like a loss of a family member or a relationship that has gone a different way than you expected it to, something like that, those don't necessarily have to be long issues, but they seem big. It's very easy to think that, wow, that's a big issue. I'm going to have to spend lots of time, lots of emotion, lots of money to really get through this and get to a point where I'm okay with it, I'm comfortable with it. And I'm very happy to stand in front of you today and tell you that that is usually not the case. There's no direct correlation between how big the issue and how much resource you have to throw at it. Worked with a lady from one of the colleges around here. She's a professor, and I forget exactly her age, but I worked with her early into her 50s. And all of her life, she had a pattern that said that going to museums or drawing pictures or doing anything like that was frivolous. It didn't have any productive purpose. Why would you ever waste your time on that? So she never journaled. She never doodled, even, as far as she can remember, for her 53, 54 years, whatever it was. And in one session, and this was, this seems like kind of maybe a small issue, but for her this was disturbing. She didn't feel she could go to a museum. She didn't feel she could take the time to look at artwork, for example. She may not have had the reaction to this that you folks did. Gee, how wonderful. She might have looked at it and said, oh, well, I can't give any energy to that because it's not real. It doesn't have any value. So this was something that was of concern to her, and we did, in just 1 hour-and-a-half session, we were able to work through what the cause of that was, which was basically a restrictive thought pattern and a belief structure. Work through that. She called me the next week and said, Eric, I've been to 3 museums, and I've written, she didn't say doodle, but I've written or drawn pictures in a journal. And I said, you have a journal? And she said, well, yeah, I've had one for years. It just never had anything in it. So just in that short period of time, she was able to free up those restrictions. For her, a big issue, but did it take a lot of resources? No, and it was surprising to her where she found herself. When she found herself at a museum the first time, she was like, whoa. And it felt okay. It felt actually really good, she said. So important to know that it's just not a direct correlation there. You don't have to spend a bunch of time digging and shelling out dollars and time and going through huge emotions to get the changes that you want to make. Number 3, often we will try to change the habit or the behavior without actually addressing the cause of that habit or behavior. Classic example is a smoker. I want to quit smoking, so what I'm going to do is every time I get the urge to smoke, I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to work out instead, because I know smoking isn't what I want to do, I know it's not good for me, and I know that working out is. And it's a productive thing to do. I'll get healthier in the whole process, so I can quit smoking that way. Great idea for the short term. The problem with that scenario is he's still having the urge to smoke. Even if he's redirecting what he actually does about it, the urge is still there. So what he's forgotten to do, or maybe he doesn't know he can do, is go in and actually find out, why does he have the urge to smoke? What is it that's driving him to want to do that? And give you a little information about how that works. Often we refer to this scenario as the tail wagging the dog. You're taking about the lightest and smallest part of the dog and trying to shift the direction of the whole rest of the inertia of the dog with just that one part, and it's very difficult to do. I would not say it's impossible, but it certainly is not the most efficient way to get a behavior change. And the reason for that is this. I call this the big giant head. And the big giant head is the NLP model of communication, and basically what it says is we experience the world, an external event, if you will. And it shows it going in the eyes here, but it's all your senses. And it goes in, and what we do is we filter it. And there are 3 big filters that help us to generalize things, delete stuff that doesn't need to be there, help us out when we come to a new situation that's kind of like one we've been in. So we can do those big 3. Everybody does those fairly well. And then the very specific filters down here deal with our attitudes, our language, our beliefs, values, all of the different things, previous decisions and assumptions that we make, all of the different filters that we have to take in that event, adjust it to what we've experienced so far, and from that we create an internal representation of of what actually happened out here? Are they ever exactly the same? Probably not ever, because of all of these things right here. And then from creating that internal representation, we get our physiology. How do we feel about what we interpret that we've experienced? And then from that, we also have our state of being. So does that make us angry? Does that excite us? What is the reaction to that? And there's obviously the arrows go both ways here. There's an interaction here, and eventually end up at the behavior. Now the person that drew this diagram didn't do the behavior down at the bottom and really small all by itself for no reason. This would be the tail, and the rest of the head here would be the dog. So if you're trying to change the behavior by simply isolating it and doing something different, what you're doing is ignoring this whole pattern, this whole process that you have. Keeping in mind, of course, the processes that we have are what I call, and what many people who study it call, processes of excellence. Because what does it take to continually do the same thing over and over, so exactly the same and so well? Well, it takes determination, it takes creativity, it takes all kinds of different very positive things. I mean, if you're talking about a corporate CEO that's taken the company to record profits, you might say, hey, those things are great for him. If you're talking about a drug addict, for example, then people go, oh, well, what process of excellence could possibly be in there? Well, again, in order to do that, as I understand it, you've got to be fairly creative, because you've got to figure out how to get your stuff. You've got to educate yourself, because you've got to know what the stuff is and where the good stuff is. And you've got to be resourceful, because how are you going to pay for that? You've got to either get a job, you've got to find, I mean, there's all kinds of things that, again, with the behavior, we would assume, oh, those are great things. But you can't judge a book by its cover. You can't judge the pattern by the behavior, because all you'd have to do is adjust that pattern and set a new outcome to adjust the pattern to, and you've got those patterns of excellence being saved. You don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, and the behavior has changed. And now you don't have to redirect. Every time you feel like having a smoke, you go to the gym. Well, how about we just change the whole pattern so that you feel like you want to go to the gym in the first place? That's the way I would like to do it. All right, on to number 4. Which from the previous example kind of leads us into this, forgetting to set a positive outcome. There's lots of instances where people actually say, I don't want to do this anymore. Great. What we're talking about there is a move away from strategy. And move away from strategies are very powerful and can be used very effectively. What you want to add to it is a move toward strategy. Because if all you say is, I don't want to do that, you really ought to say, what do you want to do when you're no longer doing that? Because if you leave it open-ended, there's lots of different possibilities of where you might go with that scenario. And it becomes cyclical. If you don't ever set a good outcome to go somewhere from where you start, there's a very good chance you're going to end up right back in that same spot. There have been examples of lottery winners that have gone from literally nothing to winning the lottery, and within a year or two they blow everything and they're right back where they started. I would be really interested to know what it was that made them buy that lottery ticket in the first place. Was it that they said to themselves, I don't want to be poor? Or was it, I want to win a ton of money? There's a big difference there, because somebody that wins a ton of money might hang on to it a lot longer or indefinitely, versus the person that just doesn't know what they want to do. They just know they don't want to be here. So eventually they come right back around to it. And so that's why it's important to set a good outcome. So in that situation, a good outcome would be to say, there's a number of things you could want. I want to be independently wealthy. I want to live in abundance. I want to live comfortably. Boy, there's a biggie. You know, everybody's interpretation in here of comfortably, probably pretty good, right? All different, but pretty good. Only you know what outcome you want. But you can set that, and as long as you do that, then you've got something to work towards instead of always looking back to work away from something.